Hi everyone, and welcome to another MCS Installer webinar session. Now, just while we're waiting for people to join, we'll give them a few minutes. I'll do a quick introduction and go over what the plan is for today's session. So for those of you that haven't joined these sessions before, my name is Tim Vass and I'm the operations manager for MCS. And a big part of my role is everything to do with the mid. So and what we've got planned for today is we're going to be going through the basics of how to raise a heat pump certificate in the MCS Installation Database, or MID for short. Now, when I say we're going to be covering the basics, raising a heat pump certificate is a little bit more complicated than raising, for example, a solar PV certificate, and there are a few more steps. So we're going to go through the basic steps today, and we are going to touch upon some of the more complicated areas, but those are actually going to get their own separate videos, and we're going to do a bit of a mini series around this, because if we were to put all of the content into one video, we would risk going over quite a long period of time. It could be up to an hour long, so we'd rather break it down into bite-sized chunks. But we're going to be doing that as a mini series, and that playlist will be available for installers to watch when they want to learn how to do all the different parts of the raising an MCS heat pump certificate. It will be covering, just to be clear, air source heat pump and ground source heat pump. The steps you'll be seeing today are good for both technologies. And yeah, so that's the introduction. I think we've given people a bit of time to join. So I think what we'll do now is we'll head on over to the MCS Installation Database, and we'll start going through this process. So I'm just going to share my screen. If you give me one moment. Okay, there we are. So hopefully you should all be able to see that now. So, I mean, I probably should have asked this, but hopefully everyone can hear me, and hopefully you can all see what's on my screen at the moment, which should be, you should be able to see the MCS Installations Database. So please feel free to put things in the chat. Let me know if you've got any questions. The Q&A we'll go through at the end of the episode, but there's two ways of asking questions. There's actually a section at the bottom of Crowdcast that says ask a question, so you can put them there, or feel free to just put them in the chat and we'll go through those at the end. But of course, ask as many questions as you want throughout the webinar. Right, so let's head on over to the mid and let's go through these steps. So the first screen that you'll be presented with is this one here. Now you might notice that my mid is very slightly different to yours. I've got a few extra tabs. That's just because I'm on an administrator profile. But all the steps that you'll see today are the same ones that you have on your installer profile. So the first thing that we need to do is select whether the installation is domestic or commercial. And in this case, we'll go for domestic. And then we need to select the technology type. Well, we're covering heat pumps today, so let's choose an air source heat pump. Now, that will then load up the relevant steps for heat pumps, and then we need to put in the total cost of the installation. There's a bit of guidance down here. We do get some questions around total cost. The best way to, if you're not sure what to put in here, is the overall cost of the installation, essentially that was charged to the customer, so the final price there. In this case, we'll put in 10,000, and then we can do this optional step down here. Now, this is entirely optional. It's if you put an email address in here, a copy of the MCS certificate, once it's been completed and paid for, will be sent to that email address. Now, this was originally designed to be used for consumers, but if you put your own email address in there, if you prefer to have it emailed to yourself as the installer, you can do that, but it is a totally optional step. And as you can see, there's no little red asterisk next to it, so it's not mandatory. So if we leave that blank, we can go to the next section. So there we go. Now, when we go to the next step, you should be presented with this, essentially this disclaimer, which says, are you sure that all the information that you have presented is correct? Now, it's very important to make sure that all the information that you've just put on that first page is correct, because once you've completed the certificate, you won't be able to go back and edit it. Now, don't worry if you find that you've made a mistake after you've created the certificate. It's not the end of the world. You can contact the MCS help desk. There's quite an easy process for them to help you to make that edit. So it's not the end of the world, but if at all possible, of course, please try and put the information in correctly the first time. And then you're presented with the next screen. And this essentially is if you just want to raise an MCS certificate, or if you'd also like to add on some additional features. For example, currently we can offer IBGs, or insurance-backed guarantees, through the MID as well. Now, the only option here which is mandatory is the MCS certificate, and the only additional product we've currently got available is the IBG. But they are entirely optional. You don't need to pick these. If you have a preferred provider, or for example, you're a Highs member and you need to get your insurance through Highs, then you can just leave this option blank. It's absolutely fine. In this case, we will raise one of these, and we'll go for a 2-year insurance-backed guarantee. We have done some information on insurance-backed guarantees. You don't always have to raise one, but in this case, we'll keep it simple. We won't go down the complications. We'll just say, yeah, we'll raise one within the MID. It'll show off all the steps that you may possibly be going through when raising your heat pump certificate. So now we need to tell the MID what heat pump we actually have installed. So we also select the commissioning date. Now, I'm going to leave the commissioning date as today, but there is a 14-day commissioning date window, which means you can raise a certificate up to 14 days after you commissioned the system. Now, don't worry if, for some reason, maybe it went on to 15 or 16 days, there was a delay, and you didn't quite have time to get onto the MID and raise your certificate. We do have a way of raising certificates outside of that 14-day commissioning window, and it's through a process called extended access. I'm not going to show you that today, but it's just to let you know, don't worry if you do miss that 14-day window, there is a way to still raise your certificate. You just have to go through a slightly more complicated process called extended access. In this case, we're going to do it for today, so we're definitely within that commissioning date window, and we're going to now select our product. Now, I'm going to select a Mitsubishi product today, not because there's any sort of product placement in this video, it's just because this particular product was the one that I was practicing with for this session. So no endorsement here of Mitsubishi, absolutely. There we go. So just going down to the product that I want to add. So we can add the product via these drop-down menus that I've just shown you. Or if you prefer, you can actually type in if you know the MCS product certification number off the top of your head, or you've got it written down, you can type it in on this box on the right-hand side, and that will also allow you to add the product that way. It's just giving the installer different options. People do prefer the 2 different methods. I personally find it easier to do it from the drop-down list. So we're going to add that product. It's very important to remember to add that product. I've made this mistake many times when I've got the product selected here and then click next, and it just says, oh, you haven't actually added the product yet. So make sure when you've found the product that you do click add, and then you click next. There we go. So now we need to say where the product is installed, and what we're going to do is we're going to put in this case, we'll put in the MCS office address. There we go. So you can put the postcode in there and then search it, and it will provide you with some suggested options. Or if you prefer, sometimes not every address is suggested by the search function. So sometimes you can just enter the address manually there. But once you've selected the address, it'll pop up here, and then you're able to go to the next step. Now, this is the first of the potentially slightly complicated areas that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. So we're just going to touch upon the RHI compliance certificate today, but we will be covering this in a separate video because we do know that some installers struggle with this area. So essentially, before you can go any further, you have to upload what is called a compliance certificate. Now, don't worry if you think, I don't know where to get that from. We actually provide a copy of the template for that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click download here, and you can see that it will download a copy of the heat pump compliance certificate template. It's an Excel document. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little peek at what that compliance certificate looks like and a bit of information on it, and then we're going to come back to the MID. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a moment. I'm going to head on back over to Crowdcast, and I'm going to share a different screen. So bear with me 1 second. So we should all now be able to see, just might take a moment for it to come up, the MCS compliance certificate for heat pumps. Now, this is a series of additional fields that you need to fill in if you're going to be raising a heat pump certificate on the MID. Now, you can see there's about 20 or 30 fields here, and they ask for slightly different information that you would find on the MID itself. So we're looking at things like design external temperature, total building heat loss at design condition. These are things that you would have calculated when you were doing the design of the building itself now, and of the installation itself, sorry. So there are a few things here. Like I said, there are some of them are a little complicated, but we do have on the sheet, there is a guidance section here. So I would highly recommend, if you do have some questions around this now, please obviously put them in the chat, but also head on over to the MID, download that compliance template, have a look at the guidance section, and that should hopefully should provide some help. But we will be going through the compliance certificate and the other RHI details in much more depth in a separate video. But this is just to give you an idea of what this compliance certificate looks like and where you can get it from. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and we're going to go back to the MID now. Apologies for the back and forth. So here we go. Back to the application and back over to the MID. So there we go. You should again be able, should give it a moment, you should be able to see the MID again now. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to select one that I made earlier, a bit of a Blue Peter moment, and I'm going to upload a compliance certificate that I've made before. Now, if you miss any of the sections out on the compliance certificate, even if it's just one of the address lines, perhaps you think, or perhaps you know that the address only has 2 lines, it's number 3 or whatever, and then it's the postcode. If you miss out any of the cells in the compliance certificate, it will the MID will stop you and say, no, you need to go back and fill those in. Any cells which you don't have the information for and need to be left, you should be left blank, you can just put NA in there. But actually what I'll do is I'll show you what happens when you try and go forward with a template which doesn't have a compliance certificate which doesn't have the correct information filled in. So if I click next now, what will happen is the MID will stop me and it will go, wait, hang on, not all the required cells have been entered. Please check the following cells and enter any of the missing values. Now, because I didn't fill in any of the cells in that blank template, it's brought up all the cells on that sheet that I need to fill in. But for example, if you just missed out one of those address lines, it would say, oh, please go back and put something in D9 and D10, for example. But in this case, what I'll do is I'll select a proper certificate that compliance certificate that I've already created. Now, one thing I will say, Crowdcast won't be showing you this. When you click on select certificate, it will pop up a normal Windows file browser window, and you can navigate to find the document you want to upload there. It just Crowdcast doesn't, I don't believe it shows you that bit. But it does, when you select certificate, it will take you to your downloads folder, for example, and you can find the document you want to upload. So we'll go to the next one there, and hopefully, yeah, so I did fill my practice compliance certificate out in detail, so that's great, and it's worked. So now we've filled in what we've installed, and we've uploaded the compliance certificate. Now we can actually fill in the details of what we have installed at the installation. So in this case, we're going to put in some details for the particular heat pump that I selected. I'm going to put in some figures here. So we're going to put in the total installed capacity, the estimated annual generation, and then we're going to say how planning permission has been granted. And we're going to say, yeah, we got this through planning permission. Have the building regulators been notified? In this case, we're going to go with one of the more common options, which is after the installation through self-certification, competent person scheme, CPS. And this is not going to be Green Deal installation. Now, your figures may vary and your options here may vary. What I've put in here is some average figures for the heat pump that I selected, and I've gone for some of the more common options that we see, the most common options that we see selected for heat pumps. So you may find that you put in very similar information here, but your total installed capacity, estimated annual generation, will more than likely be different than what I've shown you here. These are just averages. So we'll go to the next step, and it says, please confirm how you intend to notify of connection to the electricity grid. And so this essentially, how have we connected the system up? And we're going to say that we are going to notify the grid connection, post connection, and commissioning. So we've installed it. and then we're going to inform them that we've installed it. That's for the DNO, the district network operator, things like Scottish Power Distribution or Western Power Distribution. So there we go. We're then going to move on to some more information. So was the renewable heating system new at installation? Yes, very often it should be yes. The renewable system has been designed and installed to provide. So now this is a unique field that pops up when you have selected a heat pump, and it says you essentially have to say, is it going to be providing space heat? Is it going to be providing DHW or domestic hot water? Or is it going to be providing those both or a combination? In this case, we're going to say that this installation is going to provide space heat and domestic hot water. How many certificates will be associated with installation? We're just going to go for 1 in this case. Now we need to say, were there any other heating systems that were present in the building? So, for example, is the heat pump going to be standalone, or is it going to be working in conjunction, maybe perhaps with a combi boiler or another system? In this case, that will be providing heating. In this case, we're going to say that it is the only system, so none or default. And we're also going to say that there are no other alternative. What fuel does any alternative heat system appliance use? Well, there are no other alternatives, so there are no alternative heat fuels. Then we're going to go to the next section. What we've essentially said here, guys, is that this system is going to be covering all of the heating requirements and domestic hot water requirements for the building that we've installed it at. So there we go. Now we need to put in the figures for space heating and hot water demand. So the first thing we need to do is say, what is the demand of the building? Not what the heat pump will be providing, but first, what was the demand of the building? So in this case, we're going to go for this figure here. And then we're also going to say, what is the demanding of the hot water of the building? So in this case, we'll put that figure in there. Now, because our system is the standalone air source heat pump, and it is going to be providing all of the heating and domestic hot water for the system, we're going to mirror those figures again, because what we're saying in these bottom 2 fields is how much of the demand is this heat pump going to provide, and how much of the for the heating and for the domestic hot water. Now, if this air source heat pump was working alongside another system, you would find that these figures, you would put your total heating requirement for the building and your total annual hot water requirement, but the amount that the heat pump was providing for both of those categories would more than likely be less if it's working alongside another system. In this case, like I said, it's standalone. The heat pump's doing everything, so we'll mirror the figures there. Is the installation for domestic RHI? Now, if you select no on this option, then no other fields will be presented, and you can go to the next step, and that's it. However, this is another one of those slightly complicated areas which I'm going to touch on today, but we'll be going through in more depth in another video. So if you select yes, it will start bringing up some additional fields. And so in this case, I'm going to put in again some of the more common fields that we see in the mid, and this is very likely if you're applying for RHI, you'll do similar fields to this, but not always. So in this case, we're going to say that there is no requirement for metering for payment. Now, metering for payment and metering for performance are different, and that's one of the things we'll be covering in the other video, because it is very important to understand the difference between the two. We're then going to go for that the installation is meter ready, but that no metering is installed. And then we're going to select that the electricity meter or onboard meter is installed for performance purposes. So you can see that we've said this is not metering for payment. We've not installed the meter, and it's not for metering for payment, but it is doing metering for performance. And then we're going to select these 2 options here to explain, what are the onboard electricity meters being used and how many MIG-compliant electricity meters have been installed. So I know I've only touched on this. I'm sure there will be some questions around this section with RHI and with the compliance certificate. Don't worry, I've gone through them briefly now, but there will be much more information coming on these sections later, because we know that some installers have a lot of questions around these steps. We didn't want the video to go on for hours and hours. So now the next step is we're going to be looking at the seasonal performance of the product. And in this case, I'm just going to select this particular SCOP value. And is the heat pump capable of providing cooling as well as heating? Well, in this case, we'll say no. We'll keep it simple. There we go. Now, once we've filled out all those sections, actually, what we've done there is we have filled out all the sections that you need to fill in for raising the heat pump itself. This last step here will only appear if you have selected that you would like to buy an insurance-backed guarantee through the MCS Installation Database. If you haven't selected, you'll simply get a disclaimer that says, just confirm that you don't want an IBG, but you'll be raising it elsewhere if you need to raise one. In this case, we did select it. So what we need to put in here is a system owner name. So we'll put in good old Joe Bloggs. You've been used for a lot of tests on the mid Joe Bloggs. So we'll put in good old Joe Bloggs, and we'll just put in the email address that we want the policy to go to. In this case, we'll just put in the help desk email address. Now, it's very important to make sure that you put in the system owner name here. The IBG provider, IWA, will not issue the IBG if you put your own company name in there, or if you just put owner in there. You do have to do your best to make sure that you get the system owner name. And we know there can be some complications around what if it's for a housing association. Don't worry, there is plenty of information around that. But as best as possible, just put in the system owner name that you can there. And again, if possible, please put in the system owner email address. However, if there is no email address for the system owner, you can leave that box blank. You can see there's no red asterisk on it to say that's mandatory. If you leave it blank, then what will happen is the policy will be posted to the address that you said that the heat pump was installed at. And then we click next. And then we get to the payment screen. And we go through the payment process as per normal. You can choose to add this product to the basket and pay for it later, or you can pay for it right now and pay with PayPal. We've done a video on the new payment system already. I think it was the first video that we did in this series. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'm going to head on back over to Crowdcast, and I can see there's lots and lots of questions. So I'm going to go through some of those now. I really hope that was helpful. But I'm going to go through those questions now. I will try my best to answer them. But what I would say is I don't, unfortunately, know everything. If there's any questions that I don't have the answer to, what we do is we take those questions away. We consult with the relevant people who should know the answers. And then we release a document after this video. And it's got all the questions answered. And that's available for download alongside the video. So don't worry if I can't answer your question now. I will get in touch with you. But let's go through some of those questions now. Okay, so going through the first one, this was by Joyce Smith, and it says, hi, why can't we get access to the MPAN number for an installation unless we complete the first section, which once completed, we can't amend? Obtaining the MPAN was a very useful facility, which helped with the ENA form completion. That's a really good question, and that is potentially what straight away I may have to take away. What I would say is that in the MID, the MPANs are stored in a back-end database, and when you put the address information in, what the MID does is it goes and finds the MPAN number associated with that address. Now, if you're saying that it would be helpful for you to be able to actually put the MPAN in and get the address associated with that MPAN and try and do it the other way around, then that's definitely something that we can look into. It's definitely that's actually a potentially really good suggestion. So if that's what you were asking there, Joyce, hopefully that's answered your question. We don't currently have that facility, but that's definitely something potentially we could look into. Okay, so second question. This is by Pete Gammon, and it's domestic or commercial question. Does this relate to property type or contract type, i.e. working for a builder on a domestic property? Rex suggested that this would be a commercial contract. So if in the MID, we changed the definition slightly. It used to say domestic and non-domestic, and now it says domestic and commercial. It does refer to the contract type. So if you are the installer and you have a direct contract with the consumer, and that's a person who already owns the house, lives in it, and maybe they're switching from a non-renewable system to an air source heat pump, that would be a domestic contract. If you are working for a housing association and you are fitting things into houses, but you're doing it on a commercial contract with the housing association, in that case, you would select the commercial contract, the commercial option there. So hopefully that answers that question there. Okay. This one is again from Joyce. It says, I find it very difficult to find a product as often we don't have the MCS number, but only the manufacturer's model. Is there an easy method? So if you have you can use the drop down list that I showed. So if you know what the manufacturer is, you can select it from the drop down list, and then you can, on the other drop down list, you can select the model number there. So that should be easier for yourself rather than using the other search function, which is where you type the MCS certificate number in. If you want me to show you that on a one-to-one basis, Joyce, just let me know and I can show you that. That should only take us a second. We can do that after the training session. That's absolutely fine. Going through this next one. Is the total installed capacity the capacity and design temperature or max capacity at any point based on the capacity tables within the MIs? That is a really good question. I believe I actually don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, and I don't want to give you false information there, Adam. So what I'll do is I'll take that question away and I'll get the answer for you in writing, and we'll publish that on the website, and we'll make sure that everyone is aware of that, because that is a really good question. One that I honestly hold my hands up. I should know that, but it's gone out of my brain now, and I don't want to give you the wrong answer. So I'll take that away and I'll come back to you with that one. Okay, going through to the next one. When notifying building regs via NAPIT, it requests the IBG policy number, but when purchasing during the certification process, I'm not given this, or do I receive a copy of the customer's for the customer's handover pack? Can this be addressed? Okay, that's a really good point, and not something that we were aware of when we were building the IBGs into the mid. So what happens is the IBG is sent to the email address that you provide in that box, and that should be the consumer's email address. However, if you need that for your NAPIT building regs notification, what I would suggest is you put the system owner name in and then put in your email address in there. And then what will happen is that the IBG provider will send it to you, but then you have to provide that IBG to the consumer at handover. If you get, because that's not the current process, if you get any pushback from the IBG provider, come and speak to me, and I'll have a word with them, and we can establish that as a process. Or if that gets a bit funny, what we'll do is we'll add an additional box in there where you can put your own email address, and it can be sent there. But that's a really good point, something that we weren't aware of. So thank you for letting me know that. Okay. So this is another good one. Why is it that it's only 14 days from date of commissioning? Sometimes that isn't enough time. That's a really great question, Emily. And actually, when I've gone and looked into the standards, it seems like it's just it's a figure that has been with MCS for the last 10 years, and it's one that we've continued to use when the scheme administrator changed. But what I would say is that we're actually looking at that window, because again we think it is a bit restrictive, so we may be extending that window. At the moment, it is almost an arbitrary figure that was picked out at the beginning of the scheme. I'm sure there are some good reasons for it, to make sure that things are handed over at the right time. But at the moment, we ourselves have asked us that question, and we're going to be looking into that, extending that commissioning window potentially. We just have to do a review of the standards and make sure that we're not causing any issues by extending it. If you do miss it, by the way, you can always go by extended access. And one other thing I would suggest, if you are finding that the 14 days isn't enough, what you can do is, instead of purchasing the certificate right there and then using PayPal, if you use the basket option, the alternative payment method, then what will happen is the MID will add it to the basket, and it will view the date that you added it to the basket, not the date that you then pay for it later. So that way you can actually raise certificates within the commissioning window and then pay for them outside of the commissioning window. So I don't know if that would be helpful for you. Okay, if there is more than one heat pump installed, there would be more MCS certificates in section 8. Yes, that is correct. So MCS covers for installations, it's up to 45 kilowatts, unless you have 2 heat pumps on, or 2 heating renewable heating systems on the property, and then MCS goes up to 70 kilowatts, I believe. So that's why we have that option, because if you are installing 2 at one installation, you can go up to 70 kilowatts for the total size of that installation. That's why you'd say there'd be 2 heat pumps there, 2 certificates associated with the installation, with the property. Why is it possible to select 0 for domestic hot water provided by the heat pump? For example, a hybrid edge heat pump where combi is used for domestic hot water product. So I think someone has actually, when selecting air source heat pump for space heating only. So that should have been resolved. If you're still encountering that, Adam, that was a bug that was reported to us. If you're still encountering that, Adam, please let me know. And we can have a look into that, because there should be the ability for you to select 0. It used to be that there was a minimum of 0.01. It should be that you can select 0 now. So check that again. If you're absolutely certain that you're still encountering that bug, please contact the help desk. They'll pass you through to me. Say you're on the training session, they'll pass you through to me, and I'll be able to have a look into that for you. Okay, so this is from Claire Smith. Is the insurance back guarantee mandatory? Yes and no, which I know is not a particularly helpful answer, Claire. So if you're raising this for if you're raising your installation, your certificate for a domestic property, then you need to raise an IBG for it. That is part of the consumer code requirements. However, I believe that if you're raising this for a commercial property, you don't need to raise an insurance back guarantee. However, what I would strongly recommend is you contact your consumer code and get confirmation of that from them, because we're not the consumer codes, and they may have, and there are 3 different consumer codes. You've got HIGHS, you've got GGF, and you've got REC, and they all do have slightly different rules. So please check with your consumer code to make sure if it's mandatory for that particular one. But I believe the general rule is that you don't need it for a commercial contract. But again, double check with your consumer code. This is a question from Emily. If we use the IBG policy offered by MCS, what would we do for the deposit protection insurance that is required? Okay, so great question. We don't do deposit protection in the mid, because deposit protection is done at the very beginning of the interaction with the consumer, and the mid, when you raise a certificate, is at the very end. So we don't really have a mechanism for you to add deposit protection in the mid, unfortunately. What I believe has happened with the consumer code and deposit protection requirements within the MCS standards is that it is now possible for you to, if you take the deposit via a credit card, then that counts as deposit protection, and it's done via the normal credit card system. And so you don't need deposit protection as a separate thing anymore under the MCS requirements. We've said you have to put some form of deposit protection in place. We no longer mandate that you need to have deposit protection insurance in place. Again, it might be different depending on your consumer code and your consumer code rules, but that is, I believe, the guidance that we have now updated our MCS standards, because we found that a lot of people were just paying with credit card for the deposit anyway, and that is enough protection for them then. So that's the situation there. I hope that's answered that question. Okay, so a hybrid system is capable of achieving more than 55 degrees C LWT. However, when selecting the LWT SCOP on the mid only, goes 55 degrees and gives the SCOP as 0.00 past 55 degrees C. Okay, that's a really good question, and I think I have understood it, and I think I'll be able to give you an answer. Just give me 1 second. Oh. Okay, so when the SCOP data that is inputted into the mid if you're finding something that, for example, if you're selecting 55 degrees C and it only gives the option of 0.00, that is the figure that the product certification body has put into the product when they've added it to the MID. If you are finding that it should, or you believe it should have a SCOP value at 55 degrees C, then that's something that you need to let us know about, and we can potentially raise that with the product CB. As for the other thing, just do they go above 56 degrees C? That's something I'll have to go and have a look into, because I believe that it is currently capped at 55 degrees, but I'll have to go and have a look at that. But yeah, if you find that there's a value that says 0.00, it's because the product CB has said it doesn't have a value at that temperature. That's something that I'll have to maybe talk with them about. I know that's not particularly helpful answer, Adam. So what I'd suggest is I'll take that one away, because I don't want to give you false information. I'll take that one away and I'll get a clearer answer for you and have that in the answered questions documents later. That's done later, I should say. Okay, so I think that I have answered all the questions. Don't worry if I have if I've missed anything. We get all these questions off Crowdcast, and we go through them in detail afterwards. So don't worry if I've missed a follow-up. I will get back to you in the follow-up document. So I really hope that was helpful. And one thing I should mention is that the next session that we're going to be doing for these is in 2 weeks' time, not in 1 week's time, 2 weeks' time, and it's going to be covering various. There's going to be more information about it. It's going to be covering various mid topics. So it's going to be a bit of a bundle of several smaller topics that are going to be covered in one session. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully I'll see you all again next time. And thank you for attending.